I still remember the night I witnessed something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was a typical Friday evening, and I found myself driving home from work, craving a late-night snack. As I pulled into the parking lot of Taco Bell, a sense of nostalgia washed over me. The familiar glow of the Bell icon and the aroma of seasoned beef wafting through the air were like a warm hug to my stomach. I ordered my usual, a Crunchwrap Supreme, and waited patiently for my food. As I sat down at a table by the window, I couldn't help but notice the eerie silence that filled the restaurant. The only sound was the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional rustle of wrappers being tossed into trash cans. I took a bite of my wrap, savoring the flavors, when suddenly I noticed something peculiar. A fellow customer, a young woman with piercing green eyes, sat across from me, staring intently at her own Crunchwrap. Her gaze was unnervingly intense, and I felt an inexplicable sense of discomfort under her scrutiny. As I watched, transfixed, she took a bite of her wrap, and I swore I saw her eyelids flicker ever so slightly. It was as if she had entered a trance-like state, her eyes glazing over like two polished onyx stones. I felt a shiver run down my spine as our gazes locked, and for an instant, I was convinced that she knew something about me, something dark and sinister. As the days went by, I found myself increasingly fascinated by the young woman's behavior. She would sit alone at tables, staring intently at her food, her eyes taking on an otherworldly sheen in the dim light of the restaurant. I began to notice that whenever she ate a certain item from Taco Bell's menu, the Crunchwrap, the Doritos Locos Tacos, or even just the nacho fries, her demeanor would change. Her posture would straighten, and her eyes would gleam with an unnatural intensity, as if some hidden truth was finally revealing itself to her. I started to investigate further, scouring online forums and social media groups dedicated to Taco Bell enthusiasts, searching for any mention of the mysterious woman or her strange behavior. It wasn't until I stumbled upon an obscure Reddit thread that the pieces began to fall into place. A user claimed to have witnessed a similar phenomenon at a Taco Bell in rural Nebraska, where a customer's food had seemingly altered their personality, leaving them catatonic and compliant. According to the post, the same woman from our local Taco Bell was spotted at this location, and her interactions were eerily documented by fellow customers. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read through the thread, the implications sending shivers through my mind. What if Taco Bell's food was more than just a meal? What if it was a portal to some hidden realm, one that manipulated and controlled those who consumed it? The more I delved into the mysteries of Taco Bell's menu, the more I became fascinated with the Qabalah. It was as if the symbols and correspondences on the packaging, the inverted pentagram on the nacho fries box, the hexagrams on the Doritos Locos Tacos bag, and the Ouroboros on the Crunchwrap Supreme wrapper, held a deeper significance, one that spoke to the very fabric of reality. I spent hours poring over ancient texts, studying the works of Aleister Crowley and Eliphas Levi, as they described the intricate web of correspondences between the physical world and the realm of the divine. The Qabalah, it seemed, was a map of hidden connections between foods, between flavors, and between the human psyche. I began to see patterns where none existed before. The way the Crunchwrap's cheese sauce mirrored the paths of the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life, or how the spicy kick of the Doritos Locos Tacos echoed the fiery passion of the element of Mars. It was as if Taco Bell's menu items were not just mere food, but vessels for ancient energies, ones that resonated with the hidden harmonies of the universe. And then it hit me, The young woman from Taco Bell, her eyes seemed to be locked onto a specific symbol on the packaging. The hexagram on the Doritos Locos Tacos bag, it was an ankh, but not just any ankh. It was an ankh with a subtle twist, one that seemed to point to a dark and forbidden truth. As the days went by, I found myself becoming increasingly enthralled with the Kabbalistic symbols on Taco Bell's menu. But little did I know, I was about to cross a threshold from which there was no return. It started on a typical Tuesday evening when the restaurant was filled with the usual suspects, students, late-night workers, and families with tired children. The air was electric with anticipation, as if the very fabric of reality was about to tear apart. And then, it happened. A group of rowdy college kids stumbled in, laughing and joking amongst themselves. They ordered a barrage of tacos, nachos, and burritos, and as they devoured their food, their behavior became more and more erratic. The young woman from Taco Bell, who had become a sort of fixation for me, appeared at the table, her eyes blazing with an otherworldly intensity. She began to chant in a low, hypnotic voice, reciting ancient incantations that seemed to match the rhythm of the students' laughter and chatter. As she spoke, the air around them began to distort, like ripples on a pond. The colors around me shifted, and I felt myself being drawn into a realm beyond the mundane world. It was as if Taco Bell's food had become a portal key, unlocking doors to hidden dimensions and unseen realms. And then the unthinkable happened. One of the students, a young man with a messy beard, began to change. His eyes turned black as coal, his skin took on a waxy sheen, and he started to speak in a voice that was not his own. The words were ancient and forbidden, echoing with the weight of Kabbalistic secrets. I knew then that I had crossed a line, one from which there was no return. The horror that unfolded before me was like nothing I had ever seen, a realm of twisted, nightmarish creatures, all bound together by the threads of Taco Bell's twisted magic. And at the center of it all, the young woman stood, her eyes blazing with an unholy power, as if she was the very embodiment of Taco Tuesday terror. As I watched, the young woman's eyes seemed to draw me in, pulling me into a vortex of madness. The college student, now completely under her control, began to chant along with her, his voice rising to a fever pitch as he recited ancient incantations. The air around us grew thick with an otherworldly energy, like the very fabric of reality was unraveling. I felt my grip on sanity begin to slip, as if the madness that surrounded me was seeping into my very pores. The Doritos Locos Tacos on the table seemed to be pulsing with a malevolent life of their own, as if they were feeding off the chaos that unfolded before us. I tried to look away, but my eyes were drawn back to the young woman, her face twisted into a grotesque grin as she continued to chant. The words themselves were ancient and forbidden, echoing with the weight of Kabbalistic secrets. They seemed to be summoning something, drawing it forth from the very depths of madness itself. And then, like a dark and twisted dream, it emerged. A creature unlike any I had ever seen, its body made of twisted Doritos chips and cheese sauce, its eyes blazing with an otherworldly energy. It rose up from the table, its presence filling the room with an unspeakable horror. The young woman's voice rose to a crescendo, her chanting growing louder and more urgent as she summoned forth this monstrosity. I felt my mind shattering beneath the weight of it all, as if I was being torn apart by some unseen force. And in that moment, I knew that I was doomed. The Doritos Locos Tacos had unleashed a horror beyond comprehension, one that would drive me mad and consume my very soul. As I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet in a desperate bid to escape the horror that had been unleashed upon me, I caught a glimpse of the young woman's face. Her eyes seemed to gleam with a malevolent light, and her smile was twisted into a grotesque grin. She raised a hand, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as she beckoned me closer. "Come," she whispered, her voice like a rusty gate creaking in the wind. "Let me show you the truth." The Doritos Locos Tacos on the table seemed to be watching me, their crunchy shells seeming to quiver with an otherworldly energy. I knew then that I was trapped in a web of deceit, one that would lead me down a path from which there was no return. The young woman began to speak, her words dripping with honey and poison. "You see, the truth is not what it seems," she said, her voice weaving a spell of confusion and disorientation. "The world is not as it appears, and those who dwell in the shadows know the secrets that lie beyond." As she spoke, the room began to distort and twist, like a funhouse mirror reflecting my deepest fears. I felt myself being pulled into a world of madness and deceit, one where nothing was as it seemed, and the only constant was the crunch of Doritos shells beneath my feet. And in that moment, I knew that I was doomed to follow the young woman down the path of destruction, forever trapped in the crispy shell of deceit. As I followed the young woman deeper into the heart of madness, we found ourselves in a world where the boundaries between reality and fantasy were blurred beyond recognition. Every step felt like a betrayal, every decision a gut-wrenching choice that threatened to unravel the very fabric of my sanity. And yet, I couldn't look away from the abyss that yawned before us, a chasm of creamy green guacamole that seemed to stretch on forever. The young woman reached out and dipped her finger into the bowl, bringing forth a glob of the viscous substance that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. She raised it to her lips, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as she took a bite. The flavors exploded on my taste buds, a symphony of bitter and sweet that seemed to reverberate through every cell in my body. And then, like a punch to the gut, I realized that I was being forced to confront the darkest corners of my own psyche. The guacamole seemed to be alive, crawling across my skin like ants on a hot summer day. I felt myself screaming, but my voice was drowned out by the cacophony of madness that surrounded me. The young woman laughed, her eyes gleaming with a malevolent light as she pulled me deeper into the heart of the abyss. And I knew then that I was doomed to spend eternity trapped in this living nightmare, tormented by the gut-wrenching guacamole of my own making. As I stumbled through the endless maze of madness, I began to notice a strange phenomenon. Certain menu items seemed to be shifting. The words on the screen blurred and rearranged themselves, revealing new and cryptic messages that seemed to hold secrets of their own. The young woman laughed maniacally as she led me deeper into the heart of the abyss. "You're getting close," she whispered, her voice like a rusty gate creaking in the wind. "The truth is hidden in plain sight." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that I was being forced to confront the dark side of the menu itself. The items seemed to be watching me, their prices and descriptions weaving together into a complex web of deceit and misdirection. I spotted the infamous burrito of despair, its price tag seeming to fluctuate wildly as it taunted me with promises of satisfaction and despair in equal measure. Next to it sat the taco of terror, its shell gleaming with an otherworldly sheen that seemed to draw me in like a moth to flame. And then there was the enigmatic quesadilla of confusion, its filling seeming to shift and change as I watched, taunting me with promises of clarity and chaos in equal measure. The young woman reached out and grabbed my arm, her grip like a vice as she pulled me closer to the heart of the menu. "The truth is hidden here," she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. "Are you ready to uncover it?" As I stood before the menu, a sudden vision burst forth in my mind's eye. The Qabalah, That ancient system of mysticism and symbolism unfolded before me like a tapestry. I saw the Sephirot, those 10 divine emanations that flowed through the cosmos, manifesting themselves as culinary elements. Kether, the crown, became the fiery passion of the blazing hot wings. Chakma, wisdom, transformed into the creamy richness of the guacamole of despair. The young woman watched with an enigmatic smile as I beheld this vision. "The menu is not just a list of dishes," she whispered. "It's a gateway to the hidden truths of the universe." As I gazed deeper into the Qabalah, I saw the paths of the Sephirot intersecting and merging, forming a complex web of energies that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly power. The flavors on the menu began to shift and change, revealing new meanings and symbolism at every turn. "The tree of life is not just a symbol," she said, her voice dripping with mysticism. "It's a map of the culinary arts." Suddenly, the menu transformed before my eyes, its items rearranging themselves into a vast, cosmic diagram that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe within its crispy, crunchy depths. I felt myself being drawn into this vision, becoming one with the Qabalah itself. The young woman reached out and took my hand, leading me deeper into the heart of the menu, where the visions of the Qabalah awaited. As I gazed deeper into the Qabalahic diagram, the world around me began to distort and writhe like a living thing. The menu items seemed to coalesce into a massive, pulsing entity that filled the room with an aura of malevolent energy. The young woman's grip on my hand tightened as she pulled me closer to the heart of the beast. I felt myself being drawn into its maw, where a swirling vortex of flavors and textures awaited. The air was thick with the scent of spices and sauces, and I could feel my stomach growling in anticipation. "This is the belly of the beast," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din of the creature's rumbling belly. "Here, all culinary desires are satiated, but at a terrible cost." As we fell into the abyss, the world around us dissolved into chaos. Flavors and colors swirled together in a mad dance, threatening to overwhelm my senses. I felt myself being torn apart and reassembled, my very essence being transformed by the eldritch power of the menu. "Welcome to your new reality," she said, her voice echoing through the void. "Here, you will be forced to confront your deepest fears and desires, all in the service of the culinary arts." As I emerged from the belly of the beast, I felt changed forever. My senses were expanded, my appetite insatiable. I knew that I would never look at food the same way again. As I emerged from the belly of the beast, I felt a sense of trepidation wash over me. The young woman's words echoed in my mind. "Here, you will be forced to confront your deepest fears and desires, all in the service of the culinary arts." I looked around and saw that we were standing at the edge of a vast, desolate landscape. In the distance, I could see a figure shrouded in shadow, its presence seeming to draw me inexorably closer. The air was heavy with an unspoken malevolence, and I could feel my stomach churning with anticipation. "This is the taste of eternal suffering," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Here, you will be forced to confront the darkest corners of your own soul." As we drew closer to the figure, its form began to take shape. It was a being of pure, unadulterated suffering, a creature born of pain and despair, forged in the depths of the human experience. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly intensity, and I could feel its gaze piercing through my very soul. The young woman reached out and touched my forehead, and suddenly I was flooded with visions of all the suffering that had come before me, the tears, the screams, the endless, aching loneliness. And then in an instant it was over. The vision faded, leaving me feeling drained, exhausted. But as I looked down at my hands, I saw that they were no longer my own. They were twisted, deformed, as if molded from some dark and malevolent force. "This is the price of the culinary arts," she said, her voice cold and detached. "Here, you will be bound to this existence forevermore." As I looked up at her, I saw that her eyes had changed. They were no longer human, but had been transformed into a cold, calculating gaze, devoid of any warmth or compassion. As I gazed upon my twisted hands, a spark of defiance ignited within me. I knew that I had to escape this living nightmare, no matter the cost. The young woman's eyes seemed to gleam with excitement as she watched me struggle. "You can't escape," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "This is your new reality." But I refused to give in. With a surge of adrenaline, I launched myself at her, determined to break free from the clutches of the culinary arts. She laughed, a cold, mirthless sound, and raised her hand to strike me down. But just as all hope seemed lost, a figure burst into the room, sending us both flying across the floor. It was a man with a wild look in his eye, armed with a massive rolling pin. "You're not going to hurt anyone else," he growled, his voice low and menacing. The young woman sneered at him, but I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. She knew that she was outnumbered. With a swift motion, the man struck her down, rendering her powerless. As she lay on the ground, defeated, he turned to me and said, "Time to get out of here." He grasped my hand and pulled me towards the door, but just as we reached it, I heard a voice behind us. It was the figure from the vision, its eyes blazing with fury. "You'll never escape," it hissed. "This is your destiny." But I knew that I had to try. With a burst of speed, the man and I sprinted through the door, leaving the culinary arts and our tormentors behind. As we emerged into the bright sunlight, I felt a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in years. Maybe, just maybe, I could start anew, free from the shackles of the kitchen.